Well, hello and good morning. So I know most of you, I don't know all of you, and some of you, same thing, don't know me. Oh, you know what? I just remembered. I wanted to share something with you all that before I get started on myself, that if you've been at ABC for a while, will make your heart sad. A dear saint woman who has served and been a part of the ABC congregation for, I honestly don't know how long, probably at least 40 years, passed away last night. So Barbara Clark. For those of you who know Barbara, if you didn't know her personally, you might have seen her, and you couldn't miss her if you saw her. Barbara was true to herself. She was a very unique, a little eccentric soul. But Barbara, she was an amazing woman. She and her husband, Bob, were here for forever and forever. So that kind of will help lead me into my story, and I'll probably refer to her again in a little bit. But so if you don't know me, my husband is Pastor Tom, and we have been at ABC for 32 and a half years. So basically we came here shortly after I completed kindergarten. Because I certainly can't be that old. My goodness, where does the time go? I have to even think about it, but no, I'm 58 and Tom's 59. So we came here shortly after having graduated from seminary and have been here ever since. But I'm going to back up to way before that, because a lot of you don't know a little bit about us and our story. And so this is kind of just an informal, fun time to tell you a little bit about that. So Tom and I met in high school, much like Lauren and her husband, Nick. It was really interesting. We went to a large church called Las Gatas Christian Church, and back in the day, it was one of the first mega churches in the country, really. There were about 5,000 people who attended that church, and we had a high school group of about 400. So it was a big high school group. To back up even before that, I was raised in what I would call a Christian home. We went to church every week, but I don't really think anybody in my family had a vibrant walk with the Lord. And so for me, church was something that you did and somewhere that you went. I have an amazing legacy, kind of like Timothy did, that he talks about in the first chapter, of a family that believed in the Lord. So my grandmother was born in Korea, actually, so it's really interesting all the stuff going on with Korea now, as the daughter of a medical missionary. And so I have a long legacy of believers in my family, but unfortunately, I would say my parents probably weren't really just really living for the Lord. Part of it was probably the fact that we went to a rather stale church, and so that was kind of how I grew up. And I knew that my grandmother was an amazing, godly woman, and she read her Bible every day when I would go to visit her in the summer. Interestingly enough, they lived in Arroyo Grande. I grew up in the Bay Area. Tom and I both did. And as a matter of fact, a little extra bonus here, my grandfather founded Midstate Bank. So for any of you who are longtime residents, Rabobank, is that the dumbest name you've ever heard of, or what? I mean, it's like basically inviting you to rob a bank, isn't it? Gosh, anyway, Rabobank was a local bank called Midstate Bank, and my grandfather founded that. So anyway, I would go down to visit my grandparents every summer, and my grandmother would pay me a nickel for every Bible verse I memorized. So that was the way I grew up, which was awesome. But unfortunately, my family was attending a church that was fairly dead, and we just kind of went to church. Fortunately for me, we switched and found this new church, Las Gatas Christian Church. In all honesty, it's a lot like ABC, Bible teaching, non-denominational church that really emphasized biblical application to your lives. The very first Sunday, we went to Las Gatas Christian Church. The pastor was speaking, and he was, I don't even know what passage of scripture he was teaching from. He was an expository Bible teacher, so he was definitely going through the scriptures. That means you just go verse by verse and teach through what the Bible says. But he was talking about swearing. And I literally, my mouth about dropped open, because I didn't know that pastors knew that people swore. I mean, I just thought they were so out of touch with the world and with reality, because that was the type that gives you a little bit of an insight as to the type of church that we had been attending. So I was in 8th grade, and that just so caught my attention. So we switched churches, and it was really a dynamic place. And so I began to quickly realize that the Bible was written thousands of years ago, but that it's applicable to daily life, and I so appreciated that. So fast forward a couple years, or actually I guess just the next year, I'm a freshman in high school. And I decide, the whole Santa Clara Valley, a lot of people would attend Los Gatos Christian, and we lived about 20 miles away, and so there were not very many kids from my high school group that went to that church, whereas if you lived in Los Gatos or Saratoga, there'd be, like 50, 75, 100 kids from your church that all went to that youth group. So we had little campus Bible studies, and I finally got up my courage, because I didn't know anybody, and went 1 week to this campus Bible study. Well, I had just been sitting in the room for a couple of minutes when in walked this guy who I had noticed on Sunday mornings because he was so good looking. And he had on a Letterman's jacket, and I couldn't believe it because I was a freshman, and it had 1976 on the sleeve. And I thought, whoa, I had spotted him before already at church, definitely, but I just had assumed he was a senior, and because he did look a lot older, and he was dating a senior girl. And so anyway, it turns out he was only a sophomore, and I kind of thought, interesting. That puts him down a little bit more in my league. So turns out that was also his very first night ever to go to that Bible study. And that's kind of how we met and where things began. So we started out, became good friends. Tom would give me a ride to church every week, which was convenient because we lived so far away, and or to youth group. And so we became good friends and later ended up dating. Actually, the next year, my sophomore year, we dated that whole year and went to the prom. And if I had been more organized, I would have showed you my prom picture also, like Lauren did. She shamed me a bit. But I do have a little bit of an excuse. I took my elderly parents to Colorado to visit my daughter last week and over the weekend. And that was something, traveling with a 90-year-old who is not very mobile and an 88-year-old, but it was a great trip. So hopefully that's a good excuse as to why I don't have pictures to show you. But so bottom line was, we attended an amazing church that really encouraged kids to have a heart for ministry. And a lot of kids who graduated from that church went into full-time ministry. So it was planted in my heart early on, from probably about the time I was probably a freshman or sophomore in high school. I don't know what was wrong with me, but I decided that I thought I wanted to be a pastor's wife. Now, you got to have something wrong with you. Right, Cheryl? To want to be a pastor's wife. No, I'm kind of kidding. Kind of. But I had no clue what that meant, in all honesty. But I just really, I think in all honesty, I felt the Lord kind of whispering and calling to me that, and He put that desire in my heart. And again, though, I didn't really know what all that meant. Tom and I dated for about a year. We ended up breaking up, which was hard because, in all honesty, I think I knew at that time. I was 15 when we started dating. My parents had told me that I wasn't allowed to date until I was 16, but they met him and liked him, and I was the baby, so rules get broken for the baby, right? So much to my sister's chagrin, I was allowed to start dating him. So I think I knew then, in all honesty, that was the man that I wanted to marry, and that he loved the Lord, which was different for him because he honestly had been a little bit more rebellious in junior high and early high school. He'd be the first to tell you that. But I was his first Christian girlfriend, and he was really trying to figure out what it meant to walk with the Lord. And the Lord put a desire in his heart pretty early on to go into the ministry. We broke up, which was super hard, but I think we both knew that, mainly Tom, but that he really had a sense that that he wanted to, he just wasn't ready to be tied down, and we knew that we got along so well that we could easily stay together and stayed together the whole time and and just end up getting married. But I don't think we were ready for that. And the Lord did some great things in my life during the time that we were broken up. We were broken up for 2.5 years, but stayed good friends. That's a hard thing to do. But then when I began college, we ended up getting back together, and there's obviously a whole lot more detail there, but that's not really the point for today. He came to his senses is basically the bottom line. Can I just say that? So when Lauren asked me if I would be willing to share a little bit about my story, a little of my story, and be able to relate it to 2 Timothy, I immediately told her, yeah, that would be fine, but I know that I would really want to hone in on 2 Timothy 4. And I know we're a little bit out of sync, but that's because we had plans to be away next week. And so that's kind of where I wanted to emphasize and kind of show you how that ties in with my story. Because interestingly, I'm so sorry, here I'm losing markers. I just wanted to show you, if you ever see me lugging around this huge thing, this Bible's super special to me because Tom gave that to me for Christmas when I was 15. And so I've thought many times during the years that maybe I'd trade it in for a smaller, more compact version, and I just can't. And there's stuff highlighted and written in it that helps me find verses and all. But the reason why that's significant is because in chapter 4 of 2 Timothy, and Lauren alluded to this verse, and it's probably a lot of people's life verses, but in verse 7, it says, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I have kept the faith. And next to that, in my high school handwriting, I wish I would have dated it, but I put my life's goal. And I really meant that. You know, fight the good fight, finish the course, and keep the faith. That's saying don't give up. Don't be a quitter. And I think what I like about it so much is I think Paul's looking back. He's at the end of his life now, writing to a younger believer who was really dear to him, was like a son to him. And I think he's expressing here that he didn't have regrets, that he felt good about the way he had lived his life and the fact that he had been faithful. And that spoke volumes to me as a high schooler, and I knew that I wanted that to be my life goal. So now here I am, about 40 years later, just almost exactly from that time in high school when Tom and I met, when he gave me this Bible, etc. And I look back now, and that verse is definitely still my life goal. But I understand, I think, a little bit more what it means and what it takes to be able to say that, and that there's cost involved. What in the world does it mean to be a pastor's wife? You know what? I honestly don't know. I don't. And I think I know that what it meant was that I needed to be willing to sacrifice and allow my husband the freedom to be involved in service and in ministry and do different things. And lots of times what that meant was that I was home. I was at home with the kids while he was out, you know, doing things or leading things or being involved in meetings and all of those kinds of things. And Tom was amazing in that he always put his family first. We always had great vacations and would enjoy, you know, time together on his days off and those kinds of things. But ministry's demanding, and there's not really time limits on it. And somebody has to stay at home and hold down the fort, especially when you have young kids. And so, obviously, that fell to me. I think I could honestly say that I didn't really necessarily know that ministry would probably require as much of me and then of my children as what I might have thought in the beginning. Being a pastor's kid is a tough role, and you're watched and judged and evaluated by a lot of people, by Christians and non-Christians. I think that was one of the hardest things for our kids, was that there really wasn't a safe place. Non-Christians look at you and think you're weird and just think that you're different, and Christians think that you should just never make a mistake and be perfect. And that was a really hard role for my kids. And it was hard as a mom to watch them have to navigate those waters. And I did a lot of trying my best to allow them to have a safe place. And I think I felt like that was my role a lot for Tom too, was to allow or to make our home be a refuge. Tom, it's really interesting because you would assume that he's naturally a great communicator because he's a really good communicator. God's definitely gifted him, and he has a gift of teaching. But one-on-one is not his forte nearly as much, in all honesty. And again, he'd be the first to tell you that. So sometimes ministry drains him, and I sometimes felt like, in all honesty, that I kind of got the leftovers. That he gave out a lot during the course of most every day and most every week, and sometimes there wasn't as much of him left at home as I would have loved for there to have been. But that was just a way of learning to navigate the waters and realizing, I think, that he didn't need to come home and talk about everything that was transpiring in ministry. He needed to come home and just have a place to be safe and to have a refuge and kind of a respite, a place away, a place to recharge and refresh. So that's what I really strove to do through the years. I did that well at times. I didn't do that so well at times. There were definitely times when I felt like I was getting the leftovers, and that's not necessarily a great place to be. And if you're not careful, bitterness can creep in. By the grace of God, I don't think that ever happened, or at least not much, but I think that if and when it did, the Lord brought that to my attention, and I realized that that wasn't a trap or a hole that I wanted to fall into. So anyway, as I was starting to say, here we are 40 years later, and I think I realize a little bit more what it means to be able to say, I have fought the good fight, I've finished the course, I've kept the faith. But I want to back up a little bit, and let's look at, if you have your Bibles, let's look at 2 Timothy, chapter 4, starting with verse 5, because these have been verses that have really jumped out at me. So starting in verse 5, it says, but you, and whenever it says you, go ahead and insert your name because it makes it a whole lot more personal. But you, Gail, be sober in all things. I have written above my Bible, that means mentally and spiritually. So be sober, be clear-headed, be wise, see things from all perspectives. Endure hardship. That doesn't sound fun. Do the work of an evangelist. Okay, really? And fulfill your ministry. For I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. In the future, there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but to all who have loved his appearing. So I think why I like those verses so much is that it really gives us a guideline as to how to live our lives. So be clear-headed. So if I'm feeling like I'm getting the leftovers and the emphasis is all on me, then I'm probably off base. You know, that's not exactly where the Lord wants me to be, especially not if I felt like I was called to be a pastor's wife. Endure hardship. Sometimes things go great, and sometimes things are a little bit harder. And I think why, for me, just that little 2-word phrase, I like it because basically in order to be able to endure something, you can't be caught off guard by it. So basically he's telling all of us, you know what? Hardship's a part of life. It's gonna come. Is it gonna blow you out of the water? Or are you going to be prepared for it? Just expect it. And also, it reminds me, in Ephesians 6, which is a great chapter and deals a lot with spiritual warfare, the command that Paul gives there is stand firm. And I thought, you know what? During hardship, sometimes all we can do is stand firm, but that's hard, and that takes backbone. I kind of think of it as being at the ocean, and when a huge wave comes in, and then when the tide starts to go back out, it's so easy to topple over. The sand is so mushy and it's pulling you and tugging at you. You know, it takes, if you're not built on a firm foundation instead of that sinking sand, you won't be able to stand firm and stand tall. That tells me have some backbone and expect hard times. Don't just think that things are going to be easy, because otherwise you're just going to get swept away when they come. Do the work of an evangelist. Well, you know what? I'm not an evangelist, and I doubt that there's any of us in this room that are. Maybe one or two of us. But clearly, we're all told that we are to be an evangelist. So what is an evangelist? It's someone who tells others about Christ. But you know what it is? It's someone who sees life from an eternal perspective. And again, it's not just what's going on right now in my life and, you know, how am I feeling about it, but what's the bigger picture here? So that helps me. But then fulfill your ministry. I love that phrase. It means to be faithful or to complete your ministry. I have a feeling that there's a lot of you sitting there that are saying, I wish I knew what my ministry was so that I could fulfill it. That's a hard thing, but I really encourage you to figure that out. And your ministry might change at different points in times, but we all need to have a ministry. Going to say something right now that may not be super popular, but you know, I think it's a cop-out when I hear people say, well, my family's my ministry. You know what? My family's my ministry too. But I know that the church is God's bride. The church is his heart. He loves the church, and the church can't function without believers chipping in and all having a job, all having a role, and being faithful in it, and being faithful to complete that ministry. If you don't know what your ministry is, try something. Try anything. I mean, try different things. Try being a Sunday school teacher. Try working in the nursery. Try doing sound. There's all kinds of things. Try being a greeter. You know, the thing about a ministry is that so often, ask yourself first, what's my passion? Or what am I good at? What do I enjoy? Where am I gifted? And I know some of you are sitting there thinking, no, I'm not gifted in anything. Seriously, so many of us think that. I can't tell you. I've thought that so many times. I don't feel like I have a ton of great gifts, but I know one thing that the Lord has given me, and that's an outgoing personality. I can talk to most people. So I see people on Sunday mornings that are greeters, that are just super warm and friendly. It doesn't matter what your ministry is, but have a ministry. There might be a short time when during the young kids age, when you have young children at home, that you might have to take a little bit of a break from ministry, but can I suggest that be a very limited break, and maybe you even in your mind put a time limit on it, because it's super easy to get lazy and to sit back and be on the sidelines. The church can't survive. Do I sound like a pastor's wife or what? The church can't survive, though, without all of us chipping in and doing our part. Sorry, Sally, to pick you out, but Sally Atherstone is sitting in the back, and she was nodding her head when I was saying that. And when I think of someone who faithfully serves, I think so much of Sally. She has done so many things through the years. She has been a Sunday school teacher. She's written VBS curriculum. She's done all kinds of things. She's served on missions committees. She's been a missionary, for goodness sake. Now, don't anybody think you have to do that to have a ministry. But it's just so important to be faithful and to have a ministry and to fulfill it or complete it. And I really think that is a huge part of being able to say, I've fought the good fight, I've finished the course, I've kept the faith. Paul goes on in verse 6, I kind of skipped it there for a minute, but says, for I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I'm just sitting back now after being here at ABC for over 32 years and wondering, could it be said of me that I've poured myself out for others? I hope so. That requires sacrifice. That requires a whole lot of dying to self. That requires a lot of giving. Am I okay with pouring myself out for the sake of other people? And then how do I refill? That's a good question. That's a whole nother talk. But if we're going to pour ourselves out, which clearly we're called to do, we better have a way to refill. And ladies, that's having a solid connection with the Lord on a personal basis. But that's just an encouragement and a challenge to me. And then I love in verse 8, the reason why Paul does it, what he keeps his eye on, is in the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but to all who have loved his appearing. So I think of Barbara Clark. And for, I don't even know, honestly, for how many years she and her husband Bob served in a lot of different ways, but they would lock up the church on Sunday morning. And that was a way different job than what it is now, can I just tell you? Because we've done 4 different building campaigns in the over 30 years that we've been here, and the facilities have gotten a whole lot bigger. But after Barbara's husband Bob died, she continued locking up the church on Sunday morning. That was her ministry, at least in the last days. They've done a lot of different things in service through the years, but she took that seriously. As a matter of fact, I was talking to someone just last night who shared that a week ago Sunday. So Barbara was sick last week for a bit. Not deathly ill, though. She's actually really pretty healthy. Her passing came as quite a surprise. But she wasn't feeling all that great a week ago Sunday, and was talking to someone on the phone from ABC who was in her community group. And she said it was, probably getting around noon on Sunday. And she said, well, I got to go down and lock up the church. She wasn't even at church that day. And this person said, Barbara, you don't need to go to church to lock up. Just let's call somebody. You don't need to do that. And she said, no, honey, did you catch that, honey? Barbara always said, honey. No, honey, I do. I need to go to church. And so that gal saw Barbara. And I wish I would have seen her, but she said she was here. Did you see her? Cheryl said she saw her. She was here in pants, which Barbara rarely wore pants, and without makeup, which really tells you that she wasn't feeling very good. But she came down and locked up the church. She believed, I think, and I don't mean to say that it wasn't, that was her ministry, and she wanted to fulfill it. So I just encourage you, ladies, be faithful, have a ministry. I just glanced at Linda Layton, and she's been an amazing person of hospitality and faithfulness and service for so many years, and it's such an encouragement to me. So I just encourage you, be faithful, and figure out a ministry, or change your ministry often, but have a ministry and fulfill it. That's a huge motivation to me. There's so many other good things in this chapter and in the book of 2 Timothy, but that's just a little bit of who I am and what my heart is. I think through the years, in all honesty, I'll tell you a little secret, and that's that I didn't really want to think about what in the world does it mean to be a pastor's wife, because if I asked every person here, you'd all say something different. Isn't that true? It really is. And that to me was super overwhelming. And so I just couldn't go there. And I just had to say, you know what, Lord, I'm going to be true, or try to be true to the person you've created me to be. And I'm probably going to let a whole lot of people down, but I'm just going to strive to be who I am and be faithful in that. It was really interesting in my Bible, and I got a little bit of a panic this week because I can't find it. But in the opening, I've had to have this thing rebound, but Tom wrote, for Christmas when he gave it to me, on the first page, and unfortunately, one of my children ripped that out years ago as a toddler when I was having my devotions, and I know I have that, but I looked for it this week and I couldn't find it, so I'm on a mission to find that because it's so precious to me. But in it, as a 16-year-old, I was 15 when he gave it to me, and Tom was 16 when he wrote it. But I was a little bit disappointed, to be honest, because he talked about how great it was to have a Christian girlfriend, because I was his first Christian girlfriend. And of course, I was glowing over all that, And then at the end, he said, keep leaning on the Lord, because people will always let you down. Love, Tom. And I thought, that's about the most unromantic thing I've ever heard. And that was in my Bible. But you know what? Looking back now, I think that was about the best advice that he could give. And there was a lot of wisdom in that. And I think that would be my advice, in all honesty, to all of you, is keep leaning on the Lord, because you know what? People will let you down. And sometimes that's really hard. Hurt and betrayal are hard things. But the Lord never lets us down. And as a matter of fact, I love at the end, sorry, I hate having to wear glasses. That's one of the signs of getting old. Which we can't deny. But at the end of 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul gives a lot of personal closing remarks, and some of them, most of them don't apply to us, but there are a few verses in there that could stand out to you and that have to me, in all honesty, over the past couple of years. And just talks about being hurt, basically, and feeling a bit betrayed and or deserted. But the thing that grips me is that in verse 17, Paul said, "But the Lord stood with me and strengthened me." People might have let him down, but the Lord stood with him and strengthened him. And then he goes on in 17 and says, "In order that through me the proclamation might be fully accomplished and that all the Gentiles might hear." It sounds so glorious, but that was Paul's call. Did you know that? That's what God called him to do, was to tell the Gentiles about Christ. And so for me, I personalize that and say, "But the Lord stood with me and strengthened me in order that I might fulfill my ministry that he called me to years ago, which was to be a pastor's wife." I think honestly, through the years, some of the time, I kind of almost forgot or wanted to forget, in all honesty, that was my calling. But in the last couple of years, I've really been reminded of the fact that in fact is my calling, and I want to be faithful to that. I want to be able to say at the end of my life, which Lord willing, I still have a few years to go, but I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I've kept the faith. I haven't done things perfectly, that's for sure, and I know you haven't either in your life, but I know that God doesn't want us to be consumed with regret and to allow the past to impact the future. And so for the times when maybe I have let down the Lord or my husband or even myself, I have to choose to, seek forgiveness in that, and then choose to move on and not let the past tie down the future. Because in the future, there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And that's the day that I'm waiting for. And that's the day that I encourage each of you to be waiting for as well, and to have that be your goal. Let's pray, if we could. God, thanks so much for the morning. Thank you that you know us as individuals, which is a pretty crazy thought, and that you've gifted each of us, and that you've called each of us to have a ministry. And Lord, I know some ladies are sitting here thinking, man, I wish I knew what my ministry was. But God, I pray that you'd just motivate and encourage them to, it doesn't matter if they're young or old, been in the church forever or are new, to really seek out what are the gifts, what are the abilities that you've given them. Try different things, but be involved in ministry, and then be faithful and fulfill that ministry, and fight the good fight and finish the course and keep the faith. And thanks, God, that our hope is in you. Thank you so much, Lord, that Barbara Clark is in heaven with you. I wish I was there. I think there's a party going on, reunited with her husband and with the Lord. I think, and I have a feeling that there's some people that are wearing some pretty interesting things at Barbara's party, because I think that that would give her a lot of joy, and I think that you have a great sense of humor. So God, thanks so much just for the example of a faithful saint like Barbara. God, I pray that each of us would strive to be faithful in whatever it is that you have called each of us to. And we love you, Lord, and we commit this day to you. In your name, amen.
Thank you. So now you all have more homework. You have to figure out your ministry too if you don't have one. So we are going to be excused to small group. If you are a table hostess and you did not get the email from me, I also have a letter, or if you'd like a letter, it's over there, so that you know what to bring on Saturday. And again, come see me in the back if you haven't gotten your tickets. I want to see you all there on Saturday. Okay, thank you.